Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Eve McDavid, and I'm a stage 2B cervical cancer survivor who now uses her voice to fight for change in women's healthcare. I'm so excited to be here today and to share my story. Thank you to the American Cancer Society and to the HPV Roundtable for amplifying voices like mine to create the change that we believe and know is possible in this field. My story with cervical cancer began more than 2 years ago now in January of 2020. And here you see myself, my husband, and our new baby boy, Arthur, who was born 5 weeks early as a result of my stage 2B diagnosis being discovered during my 35-week prenatal checkup with my OBGYN just 3 days earlier. I was incredibly fortunate to experience the care that I did, to have my diagnosis discovered just in time, and to have delivered my son safely such that I could begin treatment, which I did just 2 weeks later. I underwent treatment during what I call peacetime, in that I was in New York City. This was in January of 2020, and it was the time right before the pandemic started. And as you see here, I completed my last round of chemotherapy in March of 2020 as the pandemic was getting underway. And I consider myself incredibly fortunate and lucky for many reasons, one of which is the result of a care team who did not stop treating as the pandemic took hold, and as other teams and other patients experienced delays and, very unfortunately, compromises in their care. I was so fortunate to have a team continue treating, and as a result, I experienced an incredible outcome. Today, I am proudly in remission. My son, Arthur, is 2.5 years old and thriving, and very much loved by our entire family, including his super incredible big sister, our daughter, Ruby Ann. We are together and whole and very, very lucky. Now, cervical cancer is a very difficult disease for all the reasons that it is difficult. But what I found most interesting is that before this experience, I had been an executive at Google for almost a decade. And as I went through this experience as a patient, I also went through this experience as a tech executive. And one of the first things that I learned in my diagnosis is that cervical cancer is preventable, it's treatable, and it's curable. And so that any woman is diagnosed with cervical cancer, especially in a country like the United States, where there are preventive mechanisms in place, and I myself had accessed routine Pap screening and the HPV vaccine in my 20s, that any woman develops cervical or HPV related cancer today is a travesty. And this, I thought, was incredibly interesting. How is it that a cancer that is preventable and treatable and curable still causes so many diagnoses and so many deaths? And this is something that, from my professional background, I took a lot of interest in, and I started to explore. I had two clear insights that I experienced personally as a patient, and then again professionally as an executive who understands the technical landscape. And both of these insights led me to the work that I presently do now. The first is that the stigma and shame and silence of this field make it very difficult for any person with a cervix, regardless of their access and their privilege, in the case like mine, to access care and to access quality care. And because of cervical cancer's connection to HPV, this is something that's very difficult to talk about. And when it's difficult to talk about, it's difficult for us to advocate for ourselves and to, again, access that quality care. The second clear insight that I came to is that the tools and the technologies that are used in today's care and practice are incredibly dated. Because of this, that limits access and hampers patient outcomes. And to me, I looked at this and I thought, here's something that I can really do about this. I can use this really unique background that I have in technology, business, and media to now fight for change in this particular field of women's healthcare. So my mission is to normalize and advance cervical healthcare so no person with a cervix must ever die from preventable cancer. And I do that in two ways. The first is that I've become a global public advocate. One of the things I learned to do really well in my career was to understand an industry and determine who in that industry is in a position of power to create change. When I was diagnosed with cervical cancer and I came through treatment and into recovery, the first thing that I wanted to know was, who else in the world cares about this? Who else in the world sees this disease the way I see it? And who else in the world is in a position of power to do something about it, to create the change that's possible? So I stepped out and began using my voice, explaining my story and my experience, and I now use it as a tool to normalize this experience, to make it more accessible, and to encourage other persons with cervixes to do the same and advocate for themselves. The second work stream I've embarked on is co-founding a new women's health venture in collaboration with Weill Cornell Medicine and my incredible treating physician, Dr. Onyinye Balogun. She and I have co-founded this company to advance the state of gynecologic cancer care. And our first initiative is modernizing the medical devices that are used today in brachytherapy procedures that are from the early 1970s, before women were even included in clinical trials and before the FDA began regulating medical devices. Because the tools are dated and because they were never properly designed for a woman's anatomy in the first place, they produce a host of complications for both physicians and the patients who unfortunately experience the brunt of the limitations of these dated tools. We're very excited about our development roadmap ahead, but most meaningfully, we are moved by the opportunity to improve the standard of care so all women can access quality care in a humane capacity and experience a high quality of life, a quality of life worth living after cancer treatment. Now, that's a bit about my story and my work. Let's talk about what it means to create real change in this field in a macro sense. And I believe it comes down to three critical steps that all lie in prevention, which of course means the HPV vaccine. The first thing that must happen is for there to be public visibility around HPV and the cancers that it causes. We need public leaders, elected officials, celebrities, influencers, folks who are in a position of power to help normalize how common HPV is and encourage those in their communities to seek out the HPV vaccine. One of the things that shocked me in this field as I was diagnosed was how few women speak out about HPV and about diagnoses like cervical cancer. I couldn't find a single elected official in this country who speaks about HPV and cervical cancer. I couldn't find celebrities who shared their stories. I couldn't find people in positions of power who talked about how common both HPV and regular gynecologic screening actually is. And this is to our detriment. We need the type of visibility that exists in other fields of medicine, and we can look to the advancements in fields like breast cancer, for example, over the last 30 years to follow their models of what it takes to create the types of advocates and advocacy in a public setting so the general population understands the importance of awareness and education in this field. The second is that we need a common language. because of the shame and the stigma, and because this is so difficult to talk about, we don't have a language where everyone is on the same page and reading from the same playbook. And by that, I mean patients and providers together having the language to discuss what it means to have a high-risk HPV strain, what it means to understand one's risk factors, and what it means to partner together to prevent a diagnosis. If we can build this very simply, we will have women who are able to advocate for themselves, providers who will listen, and a much more successful ability to prevent this preventable disease. And then finally, we must rebrand to revitalize this field. There's so much that we can learn from the COVID pandemic over the course of the last couple of years, how a public has now become aware of a virus and its consequences and the impact it has to ourselves, our families, our communities, and our world. There's so much that we can learn from this playbook in how we talk about a virus in a public capacity, how we destigmatize it, how we normalize it, and how we point folks to preventative care and treatment needs. And the playbook already exists that we can pull from COVID and apply it to HPV. The other areas we need to address in this field are the bottlenecks that prevent care providers from actually recommending the HPV vaccine. I know that the focus this year is to encourage providers to start administering the vaccine at age 9, which of course is what I also believe in. And so we need to address this with the care providers, the pediatricians, and the adolescent medicine specialists who might not be comfortable or for whatever reason do not recommend the vaccine to their patients and to the parents who are responsible for making that decision. That bottleneck is a critical gap in the ability to have the type of vaccination rates that we know are necessary to prevent this in a more massive scale. And then finally, we need to take what we've learned from public advocacy, a common language, and the ability to talk about a virus in a public capacity and distribute that information to the general public. A public service campaign distributed through mass media channels can help translate the science into digestible information that the general public can take and then act on. And we've seen this done again with COVID and in other fields, and it's been tremendously successful. So that is what I believe is necessary and very, very doable to replicate in this field. Cervical cancer is curable. And because I was so fortunate to access the care that I did, I pray that in several years' time, my case will be considered cured. Coincidentally, that aligns with my daughter turning 9 years old. And at that point, she will sit for her first HPV vaccine. And 2 years later, my son will follow. This is the model that we must create, where people of our generation understand the importance of the HPV vaccine such that when their children age into the vaccine at age 9, they are ready and prepared and have the provider who is able to administer the vaccine. That's what will make eradicating this disease and all HPV-related cancers possible. And again, I go back to the beginning, which is this is a solvable problem, and the power and the technology is already in our hands to do so. I hope that you have found this valuable and interesting and motivating and maybe even inspiring. And as such, I'd love to invite you to continue following our work. I'm building in public as we advance our development work and, of course, the advocacy work that goes part and parcel in our efforts to both normalize the field and advance the state of care. You can connect with me on LinkedIn to watch us building in real time. And if you're so inclined, you can also help support our work through the cancer research nonprofit Remission Foundation that has so generously created a grant for our work at Weill Cornell Medicine, sponsoring cervical cancer research and innovation this year. All donations through the end of the year directly benefit our work to advance the state of care in brachytherapy. With that, I will leave you with a message of appreciation for your time, your interest, for the opportunity to have this platform to speak directly to all of you, and for my gratitude for being here today to deliver this message. Thank you all. I wish you success, and know that in your efforts, I am here with you, doing my part to create the type of change that we all want to see in this world. Thank you so much.